We are in Pirkei Avot, and this is actually the third chapter. We're going to do Mishnah number 1. Looks like a simple Mishnah, and we're going to see what's going on. Akavya ben Mehaleel Omer, Akavya the son of Mehaleel says, Histakel b'shlosha dvarim ve'en ata ba lidei avera. Look at 3 things, and you're not going to come to sin. What are the 3 things? Da me'ayin bata, know from where you came. Le'an ata holech, to where you're going. Ve'lifnei mi ata atid leten din v'cheshbon. And in front of whom you're going to give a din v'cheshbon, a judgment and accounting. Me'ayin bata, from where you came. Mitipa srucha, from a polluted drop. Le'an ata holech, to where are you going? Lemakom afar rima v'tola'ah, to a place with dust, with earth, worms and maggots. That's where we're going. Ve'lifnei mi ata atid lidei v'cheshbon, and in front of whom you're going to give a judgment and accounting. Lifnei melech melechei hamelachim hakadosh baruch hu, in front of God. That's pretty much the Mishnah. That's what we're going to be addressing, and we're going to see it. Bar Tanura is a commentary on the Pirkei Avot. He explains, mitipa srucha, from a polluted drop. Everybody knows what a polluted drop means. Ve'af al pi shebishat ha'ibur eina srucha, but he says, I don't understand. At the moment that the conception takes place, it's not a polluted drop. There's no, it's a good drop. It doesn't stink. There's no pollutedness in it. She'eina masrechet berechem ha'isha ad lachar shel yamim, because it takes 3 days to become spoiled. So forth. וכשתסריח אינה ראויה להזריע, and once it's spoiled, you did not come from it, because you didn't come from a drop that spoiled. You came from a drop that caught before it got spoiled, before it got polluted. מכל מקום קרא לי טיפה סרוחה. It says, nevertheless, over here the Mishnah calls it a polluted drop, מפני שהיא קרובה להסריח מיד כשהיא חוץ למי האישה, because it's very likely to come out of the woman, and at that moment that it comes out of the woman, it is going to become polluted. והמסתכל שבא מטיפה סרוחה, and a person who looks at himself as if he comes from a polluted drop, ניצול מן הגאווה, he's not going to become haughty. He says, what are you? You're a polluted drop. You know, it's hard to become haughty when you know where you came from. This is who you are. That's what you're going. והמסתכל שעתיד ללך למקום עפר רימה ותולעה, and a person says, yeah, but after I came, maybe I came from a polluted drop, but look at me. I'm over 400 pounds right now, and my intellect is so vast, and my emotions are so far, and so on and so forth. So maybe I can be haughty now. He says, well, maybe, but you know where it's going to be? With all those 400 pounds or 200 pounds or 150 pounds of thing. The bigger you are, the more worms and maggots you're going to become. Pretty much, that's it is. So it says, so you what? You want, how much food do you want? How much steaks would you like? You know, the more steaks you eat, the more physicality you obtain, the more the worms will feast. Pretty much. ניצול, שהמסתכל שעתיד ללך למקום עפר רימה ותולעה, a person who is going, he's looking at the fact that he's going to go to a place of worms and maggots, ניצול מן התאווה והחמדה לממון, he's going to say, what do I need all this money for? How much steak can I eat? How much wine can I drink? You know, the more I drink, the more I eat, the more worms and things are going to eat me. והמסתכל שעתיד ליתן דין וחשבון פורש מן החטא ולא נחשב בעבירה. And the fact that a person knows that one day he's going to give, before God, he's going to give an accounting, he's not going to sin. That's pretty much the Mishnah. Let's look at source number 1. Source number 1, Akavya ben Ma'alel was a very special guy. We're not going to go through his out history, because we're not going to have time to finish this whole thing. But one of the things about Akavya ben Ma'alel was that pretty much he was offered to be like Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, the leader of the generation. But he held 4 things that was controversial at his time. And the other rabbis told him, look, if you're going to go back on those 4 things that you pretty much teach, not like us, on those 4 things, we'll nominate you to be the next leader of the generation. And this is what we're going to be read number 1. It's source number 1. Akavya ben Me'alel eid, Akavya, the son of Me'alel, he made a testimony. 4 דברים אמרו לו עקביה, חזור בך ב4 דברים שהיית אומר. It says, go back or change your mind in 4 things that you used to teach. ונעשך אב בית דין לישראל. We're going to make you into the leader, into the Supreme Court leader. אמר להם, so he told them, מוטב לי להיקרא שוטה כל ימיי. It says, it's better for me to be called the fool my entire life, ולא לעשות שעה אחת רשע לפני המקום, and not to be one moment an evil guy in front of God, שלא יהיו אומרים בשביל שררה חזר בו, so that they will not say he went back because he wanted his position. Now let me explain what's going on over here. It's not like they asked him to change his mind in din. I'll explain. Because if they will take a vote, they're the majority, he's the minority, the vote is going to be like him anyway. Like them anyway. It's not what they were afraid. He says, you're teaching it wrong. He says, don't even go teaching it this way. So he says, look, this is the way I understand it. I cannot go around, if that's the way I understand. In court, I'll fight my way, you'll fight your way. If I'll be able to convince you, you'll be able to convince me, whatever is happening. But I'm not going to, but he says, but it gives a whole impression to the Jewish people that these things we're not strong in. That our halacha is not strong in. So he says, it's true, we're not strong in it. Because I think different than you. And that was the way. He didn't go back, and he didn't nominate him. That's this Akavya ben Me'alel, just a little bit of background that we know what's going on with him. Let's go to Mishnah number 16. Another thing, this is about Rabbi Akiva, and this is what Rabbi Akiva used to teach. Say like this. Hu haya omer, he used to say, this is Rabbi Akiva, Hakol natun be'eravon, everything is given to you in collateral. What does it mean, collateral? God, in the beginning of the day, we didn't do anything to deserve our life. But God gives it every morning. He gives us our life. And he says it's collateral. You can do with it. I'm giving you life like you have money in the bank, like you actually deserved it. Yeah? I just expect you to do the right thing. Yeah? ומצודה פרוסה על כל החיים, and there's a net that is spread out on all the life. החנות פתוחה, the store is open, life is open, you can partake from everything. והחנווני מקיף, and the storekeeper lets you take out stuff from the store without paying cash. He says, I'll write it down, don't worry. You've got credit by me. He lets you enjoy life with credit. הפנקס פתוח, but he writes down everything. You took this, you took that, you took this. והיד כותבת, and the hand writes. וכל הרוצה ללוות יבוא וילווה. Anybody who wants to come and borrow, you're allowed to borrow. But remember, everything is written. והגבאים מחזירים, and then you have the gabai, the person who's responsible for money collection. They're going to make sure the money comes back. Tadir bechol yom. They take an accounting every day. V'nifra'im min ha'adam, and this is the part we're going to be concentrating on. And they're going to exact payment, let's call it, from a person with his knowledge and maybe not from his knowledge, in both ways. Sometimes they take payment with your knowledge, sometimes they take payment without your knowledge. ויש להם על מה שיסמכו. And they have something to account for. It's not like they just decide. Something happens, they have something to account for. והדין דין אמת, whatever happens, the judgment is true. והכל מתוקן לסעודה, and everything is prepared for the feast. So Rabbi Steinsaltz, when he comes to this Mishnah, he says, Hu Rabbi Akiva Yaomer, Rabbi Akiva used to say, Hakol, everything, what does it mean everything? Kol ma shebeyad ha'adam ba'olam hazeh, everything that we can grab in this world, natun be'eravon, is a collateral. What does it mean? שהקדוש ברוך הוא יכול להיפרע ממנו. God can collect from. ומצודה, which means a net, פרוסה על כל החיים, is spread out on our entire life. What does it mean? You can't escape it. There's a net that covers the entire ocean. You can go around the ocean and you can pick up everything, but you will never be able to escape that net that is spread out above the entire ocean. And he explains, העולם הזה כולו הוא כאין חנות פתוחה. God put us in this world, and it's in Costco, which is open, and you don't have to come with cash. You don't have to come with anything. You just come in. It's a big Costco, the entire world. שאפשר לקחת ממנה כל מה שחפצים בו. You can take from it whatever you want. Anything you want, you're allowed to take. This one, or this one, or this one, or this one. והחנווני, and the storekeeper, who's God, אינו תובע מיד תשלום. He's not asking immediately the payment. So if you want to take, take. I'll ask for the payment. But wait, you can take, you're allowed to take. בין שהוא עונש, בין שהוא שכר. Which means, whether the person deserves a punishment for what he took, whether he deserves a reward for what he did. Both things God waits. אלא מקיף, נותן הכל בהקפה. God waits. He writes down. This is what you owe, this is what thing, this is what happened. ואולם הפנקס שלכם ואני פתוח. And it's true, maybe they're not immediate payment coming in right now for the behavior, but everything is written down. והיד כותבת את מעשה אדם, והם אינם נשכחים. The hand writes the deed of the person, and they are not forgotten. וכל הרוצה ללוות יבוא וילווה. And anybody who wants to come and borrow from this life can come and borrow from whatever is found in the store. אלא שעליו יזכור, but he has to remember שלכל דבר שהוא משתמש בו יש מחיר. Everything that we're going to use, there's a price. There's nothing in life that you're going to do that doesn't have a price. והגבאים, and then there are the people who are going to collect, the collectors, whether the good collectors or the bad collectors, they're going to come in. Sometimes the collectors give punishments, sometimes the collectors will give rewards. שליחי הקדוש ברוך הוא בעולם הזה, they are the messengers of God in this world, God has many messengers, מחזירים בעולם תדיר בכל יום ויום. They go around the world and they see the statement and they say, okay, let's take care of this problem. And they go again, let's take care of this one, let's give this one a little bit more, this guy messed up, let's do that to him, whatever they do. והם נפרעים מן האדם, גובים את החוב מדעתו ושלא מדעתו. And they take the measurement, or they take the monies from the person, the punishment or whatever you want to call it, from his knowledge and not from his knowledge. בין שהוא מכיר בכך, whether he's aware of it or whether he's not aware of it. ויש להם על מה שיסמכו, and you can't complain because they have the thing written down. There's nothing to complain about. שהכל נעשה בצדק ומשפט. Everything is done with righteousness. ויש לדעת, and we have to know, שהדין דין אמת, that the judgment is always truthful. גם אם איננו יודעים כיצד הוא נעשה. Sometimes it seems unfair. It seems that shouldn't be truthful. I don't deserve this. You have to know, that's the truth. ואף אם הוא נראה לנו נוח או חמור מדי. Sometimes it says, I don't deserve it. A person wins the lotto. He says to himself, why did I win the lotto? Why is it me? How is it possible that I won it? Or the opposite. He can lose. והכל מתוקן לסעודה, למתן השכר הגדול, לעתיד לבוא בעולם הבא. It says, don't worry about the big feast, the big reward, the big punishment, all comes in the world to come. Bartanura says, לדעתו, according to his knowledge, פעמים שזוכר את חובו, sometimes he remembers how he messed up, so he doesn't complain about the bad things that are happening, ואומר יפה דנתני, and he says to God, God, you know what? I deserved it. Whatever came now, I deserved it. ושלא דעתו, but sometimes bad things happen, and a person פעמים ששכח, sometimes he doesn't remember what he did. And when bad things happen to him, he says, God, why me? Like we all do, all the time. Why me? וקורא תגר כנגד דינו של מקום בחורו. He says, God, what are you doing? You don't know what you're doing. If I ran the show, I would have ran much nicer than you. I would be nicer than you are. Okay. Like I said, it's going to be a little bit controversial, but stick with me. דובר כמה פעמים, we said many times, אודות דברי חק מוחדמור. This is the Rebbe writing it, and he says it said in the name of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe. בעל עלילא, שמביא באחד המאמרים, that he explains this Mishnah as follows. את פירוש הבעל שם טוב בלשון המשנה. The Baal Shem Tov says, has an explanation of this Mishnah. But it's a strange explanation. It says, נפרעים מן האדם, it says, payment is exacted for man, מדעתו ושלא מדעתו, with his knowledge and without his knowledge. It says, what do you mean payment is exacted with one's knowledge and without? It says like this, שבתחילה שואלים אותו, that in the beginning they asked him, כיצד צריכים להתנהג לפי דעתו? In other words, they come to a person and it says, you know what you did, right? What should be the punishment? You ask the guy, what should be your punishment? You know something you did wrong. You know you did wrong. What should be your punishment? And you ask him what the punishment should be, and he tells you what the punishment should be. אם אדם שעשה עניין מסוים, וכאשר פוסק את הדין, and when he says what the punishment should be, ששכרו או ענשו כך וכך, that the reward should be this, or the punishment should be thus, הרי לפי מה שפסק מדעתו, according to what he said, the judgment is, בחשבון שהמדובר הוא אודות פלוני, but it's not like he knows. See, if you're going to ask him about himself, ask any criminal about himself, he says, he's going to give him a lenient things. About a reward for himself, he's going to give himself a high reward. So he says, no, that's not how you ask it. You always trick him by asking the question about somebody else.
King David with Kifsat Arash.
That's what we're going to discuss. Very good. We're going to see it's going to be controversial. We're going to see. בחשבו שהמדובר הוא אודות פלוני, when he thinks that we're talking about somebody else, not him. נפרעים ממנו על העניין דומה לו. We take the exactment on things that are similar to him. גם כאשר הרי זה שלא מדעתו. The Tao, it is not out of his knowledge. שכן בידעו שהדבר נוגע אליו, רצונו לחזור בו. But now, when he says, I gave an exact statement about the other guy, I said what should be done to him, now they're going to come back to you. You said, anybody who gets, who drives drunk on the highway, you know what you should be doing to him? You should be in jail for 5 years. And then a person goes to the bar and decides, but it's not that far to my home. But somebody else, it's easy to say you should go to jail for 5 years. You just took 2 beers. It's not a big deal. And I just drive home after 2 beers. For me, about me, no. It's not 5 years already in jail. That's too much. ועל פי זה יובן גם דיוק לשון המשנה, לפני מי אתה תן לחשבון. It says, and look at the words. It says, in front of you, before whom you are destined to give a judgment and an accounting. Din v'cheshbon. A judgment and an accounting. Tchila din, first judgment, and then accounting. That doesn't make sense. First comes the accounting, then comes the judgment. He says, no, it goes the opposite. First you give the judgment to yourself, and then comes the accounting. This is what you did. דלכאורה תחילה צריכים לעשות חשבון. First needs to be the accounting. ואחר כך יכול להיות דין פסק דין. Only then is the judgment. כי בתחילה שואלים אותו מהו הדין, because in the beginning you ask the question, what's the judgment? The person himself. על עשיית דבר פלוני, on the fact that he did something, ואחר כך עורכים איתו חשבון, and then you work with him a calculation. האם דין זה מתאים אליו? If this judgment is befitting to you. Let's see, is that what you said the judgment is? Now let's say, is that what you did? Now you give the accounting. Okay, you explain your behavior according to the judgment you gave. Okay. Source number 2, on page 7. כי שמעתי בשם הבעל שם טוב. This was written in the name of the בעל שם טוב. כי קודם כל גזר דין שבעולם, before any judgment in the world, מאספים את העולם, את כל העולם, אם מסכימים לדין ההוא. You make a collective being to the world. You ask the people of the world, do you guys agree with such a judgment? Is such a judgment sounds truthful to you? Yes or no? This is a truthful judgment or not a truthful judgment? ואף את האיש בעצמו שנגזר עליו הדין. And one of the people you ask is the person it was decreed on. שואלים אותו אם הוא מסכים. They ask him, does he agree? אזי נגמר הדין חס ושלום. And then if everybody agrees, that's going to be the judgment. והעניין, and then it says, כי בוודאי אם יישאל לו בפירוש של עצמו, it says, if you're going to ask him the judgment about himself, בוודאי יכחיש ויאמר שאין הדין כן. He's going to say, no, I'm not guilty. It's not such a severe judgment. If he knows the judgment above him. אך מתאים אותו. But you give him a trick. ושואלים אותו על כיוצא בו. And they ask him on somebody else, in another case that is similar to it. והוא פוסק הדין, and then he gives the judgment, and then the guys with the gabbai says, that's a judgment. That's what's coming to you. Just to teach us. When you judge somebody else, you're not judging him. You're judging yourself. That's how everybody has to be careful. ואזי נגמר הדין. And only then the judgment is finished. And he says, like you brought, as we're going to explain soon, וכעניין שמצינו בדוד המלך, just like we found when it comes to King David. בבוא עליו נתן הנביא, when Nathan the prophet came to him, וסיפר לו מעשה האורח, and he told him a whole story. ענה ואמר חי השם וכולו, he told him, I make an oath, ואת הכבשה כולו, אזי נפסק הדין, and דבר כאשר יצא. We're going to go through the whole case later on, so I'm not going to go through it right now. וזהו נפרעים מן האדם מדעתו, and this is what it says, you take an extraction payment out of a person from his knowledge, which means that you ask his opinion, but on another case, ואף על פי כן הוא שלא מדעתו, but nevertheless it's not from his knowledge, because he's thinking it's not his act, it's somebody else's act. כי אינו יודע שהדין הוא עליו, because he doesn't know that the judgment was on him. So let's like this lesson from the Baal Shem Tov is actually came from a story in Nach that you just mentioned. We're going to read the story and we're going to see if the story makes sense. So let's look at the story of David and Bathsheba. You know the big sin that David made with Bathsheba? That's what we're going to discuss today. That big sin. ויהי לתשובת השנה לעצת המלאכים. It was the return of the year at the time where the kings go out. וישלח דוד את יואב ואת עבדיו עמו ואת כל ישראל וישחיתו את בני עמון ויצורו על רבה. ודוד יושב בירושלים. It was a time of war. They destroyed the children of Ammon and King David was sitting in ירושלים. ויהי לעת הערב. It was by evening. Remember the story with King David. Most people think about King David as someone like maybe a tzaddik, but what kind of a tzaddik we don't know. Yeah, King David was a complete tzaddik. So this whole story now, try to have it in these things in mind. What do you mean King David is a complete tzaddik? ויקם דוד מעל משכבו. King David got up from his own bed ויתהלך על גג בית המלך. He started walking on the roof of the house. וירא אישה רוחצת מעל הגג. And over there he saw, because his house was the highest, he saw the second highest house. And on that second highest house, there was a woman who was washing herself on the roof. She didn't think anybody can see her, because her house was the second highest. You know, she didn't think the king is going to look down, right? והאישה טובת מראה מאוד, the woman was very beautiful looking. וישלח דוד וידרוש לאישה. King David says, oh, nice woman. Who is that woman? ויאמר, הלא זו בת שבע. This is בת שבע. The famous בת שבע. בת אליam אשת אוריה. She's the wife of אוריה החיתי. Of אוריה the Hittite. וישלח דוד מלאכים. And King David sent messengers. ויקחיה. He took her. ותבוא אליו וישכב עמה ומתקדש מטומאתה. ותשב אל ביתה. And she came over to him, he laid with her, and then she purified herself, and then she returned to her house. Okay. That's a story. Common practice? None at all.
That's Donald Trump. He let you know.
Yeah. Forget Donald Trump. Over here you have a tzaddik. That's our problem. We have a tzaddik that behaves in such a manner, we'll have to deal with it. How this story can even happen? What are we talking about? So let's continue. Now, Nathan the prophet comes to King David after this whole incident, and he doesn't want to mention exactly what King David is. He can tell David, hey David, you did this and this and this. What's your punishment? But that's not what his story is. He tells him a different story. Let's look what Nathan the prophet comes. וישלח השם את נתן אל דוד. God sends Nathan to David. ויבוא אליו. And he came to him. ויאמר לו. So this is the story that Nathan says to David. שני אנשים היו בעיר אחת. There were two people living in one city. אחד עשיר ואחד ראש. One was a rich man and one was a poor man. לעשיר היה צאן ובקר הרבה מאוד. The rich man had a lot of sheep, a lot of cattle, ולרש אין כל אם אשר כבשה אחת קטנה אשר קנה. The poor man only had one sheep. ויחיה, and he loved it, ותגדל לו עמו ועם בניו. And this sheep grew with him, with his sons, יחדיו, together. In other words, this is very uncommon at the time. You remember, at that time there was no such thing as pets. She was a pet. That kivsa was a pet. It wasn't food, like at that time. She grew up, they were attached to this. מפיתו תאכל, he used to eat with her, ומכוסו תשתה, she used to drink together with him. ובחיקו תשכב, he used to sleep with him. ותהי לו כבת, he loved her like a daughter. ויבוא אלך לאיש העשיר, a guest came to the rich person, ויחמול לקחת מצונו. He didn't want to take one of his own sheep. He says, why should I take one of my own sheep? One of my food. ומבקרו לעשות לאורח הבא לו, to give a feast. ויקח את כבשת האיש הרש. So it says, I'm going to take that sheep, the poor man's sheep, for my guest. ויעשה על האיש הבא עליו, and he gave it to the man who came upon him. ויחר אף דוד באיש מאוד. David got extremely angry. Vayomer el Natan, and he said to Natan, he made an oath, Chai Hashem, ki ben mavet haish ha'oseh hazo. I says he deserved the death penalty. For such an act, you deserve the death penalty. ואת הכבשה ישלם 4 times, and the sheep he should pay 4 times. עקב אשר עשה את הדבר הזה, ואשר לא חמל. Because he did such an awful thing. He had no mercy. He gave a judgment right now. Now comes the accounting. See? The accounting is going to come after the judgment. ויאמר נתן אל דוד, and Natan came to David, and he says, אתה איש, you the man. You are the man. כי כה אמר השם אלוקי ישראל, so say God, the God of the Jews, אנוכי משחתיך למלך על ישראל. I'm going to make you, anoint you to a king on all of Israel. ואנוכי הצלתיך מיד שאול. I saved you from the hand of King Saul who tried to kill you. ואתנה לך את בית אדונך ואת נשי אדונך. I gave to you all those wives בחיקך. I gave to you 18 wives. Not enough? How many more do you need? ואתנה לך את בית ישראל ויהודה. I gave you the house of Israel, the house of Yehuda. Everything I gave you. והיא מאות והוסיף אליך כהנה וכהנה. And I gave you in the beginning 6 wives. You said it's not enough. I gave you 6 more. You said it's not enough. I gave you 6 more. You have 18 wives. How much more do you want? מדוע בזית את דבר השם לעשות הרע בעיני השם? He says, why are you going against God this way? That's the accounting. He says, God was so good to you. What are you doing, King David? So he tells him, but there's going to be a consequence. What's going to be the consequence? ואתה לא תסור חרב מביתך עד עולם. The sword should never depart from your house. And that's exactly King David. If you know what happened, even before King Solomon took the throne, there was constant fights throughout history about the dynasty of King David. Continuously, from that point onwards, because of this. Constant fights throughout. כי ויזיתני ותיקח את אשת אוריה החיתי, you took the wife of Uriah the Hittite, להיות לך לאישה, to be for you for a woman. כה אמר השם, so said God, הנני מקים עליך רעה מביתך, all the bad is going to come from your own sons, from your own offsprings. They're going to be fighting, killing each other, being the evil ones. Everything is going to come from inside. ולקחתי את נשיך לעיניך, I'm going to give your wives in front of you, ונתתי לרעך, and I'm going to give it to somebody else. ושכב את נשיך לעיני השמש הזאת. And he's going to take your wives and lay with them because of your act. You did it in hiding. I'm going to do it that somebody is going to do it to you from your own sons in revealed. He's going to do it in a revealed manner. That's yeah, very good. כי אתה עשית בסתר, it says, you did it in hiding, ואני אעשה את הדבר הזה נגד כל ישראל ונגד השם שלו. I'm going to reveal it in front of everybody else. And look, this is one of the great strengths of King David, by the way. It's amazing. You know, it's something that you're never going to hear a politician for sure say, or anybody say in power. Immediately what King David says, he didn't try. You know, if you remember King Saul, yeah, whenever there was a problem with King Saul and the prophet came over to him, he says, why did you do this? King Saul always had an excuse. I did it because of this. I thought, are we going to give this? Are we going to give more sheep to God? That's why he always had an excuse. When Nathan, Saul always had an excuse. So did Adam. We're going to be talking about that also. So did Adam. Everybody has an excuse. King David, immediately when he heard, what did he say? Vayomer David el Natan chatati lash. Immediately he says, you know what? I sinned to God. Immediately. All the things, humble. I sinned. That's what he said. Okay. The question is, we're going to try to understand how such a great man as King David do such a thing and what's going on over here. The story is much deeper than we think. Let's take a couple of things. Now, we all know that who came from this union of King David and Bathsheba? It's King Solomon. King Solomon came from the union of David and Bathsheba.
That King and
Bathsheba, that's right. King Solomon came from it. Yeah, he's the son that came from that relationship. King Solomon is the son. Now, according to Jewish law, think about it. If you go with a married woman's son, if you sleep with a married woman, the son is what? A mamzer. Thank you. So the question is Solomon a mamzer?
But then she was a widow.
She was a widow?
Yeah. Because
We will talk about it.
King Shlomo was not the first.
We'll discuss.
Was dead.
We'll discuss it. We'll discuss it. Very good. We'll see. But the idea that the king, it looks like something strange. God wanted this union to happen in some manner because King Solomon was supposed to come out of the union, and God wanted, and King David, and how does it actually work? What's going on over here? So let's start to understand. The Rebbe, this is on page 10. הנביא סיפר לדוד סיפור על השיר שלקח את כבשת הרש של העני. The prophet told King David a whole story on a rich person that took the sheep of the poor person. And when King David pronounced the sentence, it says, "You the man." ולכאורה, it says, why you need this whole thing? Why is it? Come to him from the beginning and tell him what you did. So the Rebbe says, אלא ככל סיפורי התורה למדים גם מסיפור זוהר, we learn a teaching. עד כמה גדול כוחו של יהודי. And this is going to be something very interesting. Something very controversial. Something that we need to understand. אפילו מי שלא כדבעי, every Jew, even a Jew that doesn't behave the right manner, אי אפשר להיות נפרעים ממנו. It says there's no court on the face of the earth or in the face of the heavens. There's no court that can judge a Jew. You can't judge a Jewish soul. A Jewish soul is part of God. It cannot be judged by anybody lower than it. It needs a higher form to judge a Jewish soul. And the only higher form to judge a Jewish soul is the Jewish soul itself. That's why it's necessary to come to the Jewish soul and tweak it to bring judgment. Because there's no power in the universe that can judge the soul itself. אלא רק כאשר נותן רשות על זה מדעתו, only when the soul itself gives permission to judge it, אי אפשר לעשות עימי חשבון, כל זמן שלא פסוק בעצמו הדין. You cannot give an accounting on the soul before he agreed on what the judgment is. That he agreed that judgment is fair or that judgment is not fair. The soul itself needs to agree. כי בסיפור הנ"ל, שרק שלאחרי שדוד פסק את הדין, אז אמר נתן לוי אתה איש. Only after King David said the judgment, only then Natan could tell him what the accounting is. Now, the things that we need to understand, as we said, is this whole story with King David and Bathsheba. What's going on over here? So the first week we're going to do the plain halacha, if it was right, if it was wrong. So we'll see. This is from Shmuel. It says, "Vayenachem David et Bathsheba ishto." David comforted Bathsheba, his wife. This is after, like you said, the first son died. Vayavo elea vayishkav ima. He came to her. He laid with her. Vateled ben. She gave birth to a son. Vatikra et shmo Shlomo. And she called his name Solomon, Shlomo. V'Hashem ahevo. And God loved him. God loved such a creature that came from lust, that came from this. What does God love about it so much? So let's just understand practically why it was not a mamzer. Right? So there was especially now, the rule is like this. When people, why did, in Israel, when God forbid there's dead people, we try to do everything to make sure that we get dead bodies back. Especially of soldiers, especially if they're married. Now, does everybody know why? Because if they're married, their wife, if the body is not ever discovered, their wife can never get remarried. That's it. So you need something for the wife, you need a part of the body, a proof that the person is dead in order for her to ever get remarried. So that's very, very important. In the old time, they used to, it's not like today. People used to go out to war. People died left and right in war in the old times. And many, you would come back. You might have thousands and tens of thousands of women who are left behind who can never get married in the old times. There's no communication. You'd bury the people right over there. You don't have time. It's not like today, which you can do something maybe. So there was this thing that they always did. Before war, all the soldiers gave a get to their wives. Before they went out to war, retrospectively, they gave a get to the wives. So that if I don't come back, this is the get. This is the get for you. So let's see. כל היוצא למלחמת בית דוד, anybody who went out to the war in the time of the house of David, get כריתות כותב לאשתו. He wrote a bill of divorce for his wife. Rashi explains, get כריתות כותב לאשתו. He says like this, שאם ימות במלחמה, that if I die in war, יהא get מיום כתיבתו. The get is effective not from the day I die. It is effective from where? From the day I write. In other words, it is effective now because you can go to war for 10 years. Yeah? Retrospectively, it gets affected to the day that the person lives. והרי מת אוריה במלחמה. And Uriah died in the war. It's true he died because King David sent him, whatever you want to say, to the front lines. So it might be not the most moral thing, but halachically it's less problematic. Let's put it this way. The other problem we're going to have with it, halachically it's less problematic. The other problem that we have to say, but it's still not nice. Come on. Everybody knows what he's doing. It's not very nice. So to have some kind of understanding it, let's see what the Sages says. In source number 6, Amar Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani says, Amar Rabbi Yonatan, and he says in the case of Rabbi Yonatan, Kol haomer David chata eino ela to'eh. Now it becomes very controversial. He says, if you think that King David did anything wrong, you're mistaken. Really? The story sounds like he's wrong. What do you mean I'm mistaken? Shene'emar, it says, I'll tell you why. Break your head. But this is what I have, the Torah is telling about him. It says, Vayehi David lechol drachav maskil. It says, King David was wise in all his ways. Vehashem imo. And God agreed with him. Efshar chet ba leyado v'shchina imo. It says, you want to tell me that he sinned and God is with him? Is that what you want to tell me? Okay. So he sinned, but God was with him. So that's a strange statement. Let's continue. Darash Rava. Rava is going to start. I'm going to start something beforehand. He doesn't bring it over here, but I'll give you the introduction for this whole story. Everybody remembers King David and Goliath. When King David was not a king, Saul was the king, King Shaul was the king, and Goliath was making trouble. And Saul said, I need somebody to take care of this guy. King David came, and you remember with the stone, he brought Goliath down, and Goliath fell. When Goliath fell down, Goliath had a belt, and on his belt there was some mechanism for his sword, and he wanted to take out the sword to cut Goliath's head off. You remember that story? So now the mechanism, he didn't know how to take the mechanism out. So he said, King David made a statement, whomever finds out how to open up this mechanism, tells me how to open up the mechanism, I'll make sure that any daughter of Israel will be married to him. He can take any daughter of Israel. That's what he said. And Uriah HaChiti, this Uriah that married Bathsheba, he showed him how to open the buckle. But now God says, who are you to give daughters to whomever you want? You're giving wives? You are allowed to give your wives. But you know whose wife you're allowed to give? Your wife. You're not allowed to give somebody else's wife. Your designated wife that was supposed to go to you, she's going, that's what you gave to Uriah HaChiti. This is Midrash. Yeah. That's what you gave to Uriah HaChiti. Your designated wife, you're not allowed to give a woman that's not yours. So it's true your words will have stuff. So actually King David was supposed to marry Bathsheba from the beginning. But he, in his judgment, this is what he did. So Darash Rava, let's look at, we're going to understand now source number 7 a little better. Darash Rava explained, ראויה הייתה בת-שבע בת אליעם לדוד מששת ימי בראשית. God had a plan of King Solomon from the 6 days of creation already. He planned it out. The whole thing had to come back. In other words, King David and Bathsheba had to get married. There was no other way. King Solomon had to come from them. There's no other way. That's from the beginning. That was known. אלא שבא אליו במחוב. But we're going to see what was his mistake soon. If it was a sin or not a sin, you think about it soon. Yeah? But she came to it through pain. How? וכן תנא דבר רבי ישמעאל. It's not the only place where it says. It also was taught in the house of Rabbi Ishmael. ראויה הייתה לדוד בת שבע בת אליעם. It says she was befitting to him. אלא שאכלה פגה. But he got her when she was unripe. In other words, he should have waited 2 more seconds until her husband would really let God run the show. You don't have to send her husband to war. God, don't worry. Her husband would have died at war anyway. It's not up to you to have decided it. So let me just go back in history and see this problem from the beginning. This problem is not the first time in history. When we tell God, we know how to run the show better than you, and when we try to push the agenda on God. In the 6 days of creation, Adam and Chava, God came to Adam and he told him, this is 3 hours before Shabbos. Right? Adam was created. Probably an hour before Shabbos, or 2 hours before Shabbos, this has happened. He told him, do not eat from the fruit of tree of knowledge. Yeah? God planned for Adam to make Kiddush on it. When? On Shabbos. On Shabbos, he would have told him to make Kiddush on the fruit of tree of knowledge. But Adam and Chava, they thought they're smart. And they're going to push the agenda. We're going to acquire something before it's what? Before it's ripe. And this is what caused the entire problem. It started with Let's take another example. In Jewish history, there's...
When they also had sexual relationship before Shabbat rather than wait for Shabbat. I heard about midrash like that too. They couldn't wait.
That's true. Yeah. Same thing, same idea. Yeah. They had to bring the offsprings before, you're right. The same thing. There's another similar aspect. Let's discuss it. Rivka overhears Yitzchak, her husband, planning to give a blessing to Esav. That's what she's hearing. She's overhearing. So she runs ahead and she tells Yaakov, go do what? Go steal the blessing from your brother Esav. So Yaakov goes and steals the blessing from the father Esav. If you look at the whole verses, by the way, we don't have the time to go through the whole verses, but you'll notice what Yitzchak's plan was. The blessing he gave to Esav was not the blessing that was meant to go to Yaakov. He meant to give the Yaakov different blessing, Yaakov's blessing. Because she messed up, he was forced to give Esav Yaakov's blessing. And later on, he was supposed to give, he gave Yaakov Esav's blessing. Yeah? And you can see later on in the verses, if you go through the verses, even when Yaakov meets Esav after he comes back from Haran, he says, all the blessings take. I don't want all the blessings that Father gave you. This is what, because why? Again, because she couldn't wait for another 2 minutes for Esav, for Yitzchak, her husband, to also bless Yaakov afterwards. Everything comes because when we think God so-called doesn't know what to do, and we want to push the agenda. All should have happened is King David to stay. God knows what he's doing. Let him do. Let's look in the Zohar, source number 8. Amar lo Rabbi Abba said, והרי למדנו שבת שבע של דוד המלך הייתה מיום שנברא העולם. We already know that Bathsheba was supposed to go to King David from the day the world was created. אם כן, מדוע נתנה הקדוש ברוך הוא לאוריה החיתי מקודם לכן? So why did he was giving to Uriah the Hittite beforehand? אמר לו, כן דרכיו של הקדוש ברוך הוא. He says, this is the way of God. אף על פי שהאישה מזומנת לאדם להיות שלו, even though it's supposed to be a woman was supposed to go to a man, and that woman is supposed to go to his man, מקדימו אחר ונושא אותם קודם שהגיע זמנו של זה. Somebody else can come and marry her before your time. And then you feel, King David felt in his neshama, this is the one that the future dynasty lays on. It's true. He felt in his neshama. But wait. Don't make decisions for God now. Don't push the agenda. Wait for God to give it to you. You don't have to do steps for it. כיוון שהגיע הזמנו, when the time came, נדחה זה שנשא אותה מפני זה, השני שבא אחר כך. God would have taken care of Uriah. He would have killed him. You didn't have to get involved. It wasn't up to you. ומסתלק הראשון מן העולם, the first one removed from the world, וקשה הדבר לפני הקדוש ברוך הוא להעבירו מן העולם, מפני השני לפני זמנו. It is very difficult for God to remove him from the world before the second one's time comes. In other words, God doesn't, it's not your time yet. There's no reason for you to get involved. And when you mess up the whole system, you cause trouble. Let's look at Talmud Avodah Zarah at source number 9. And we're going to see other cases where something doesn't make sense. By the way, there are 4 cases in Judaism that the whole thing doesn't make sense. Number 1 is the tree of knowledge. So God did want them to eat the tree of knowledge. What's going on over here? Another case that everybody always asks the question is Yehuda and Tamar, King David's ancestry. The whole relationship with Yehuda and Tamar, that whole relationship, which is forbidden relationship, that King David dynasties came from, Yehuda was a tzaddik. What was he doing going to prostitutes on the side of the road? You can see there's something in all these stories that God, you can see it's almost like tzaddikim are behaving in a manner that doesn't make sense. So sometimes it's an individual tzaddik that does it. Sometimes it's the nation when it's a tzaddik does it. Let's look at the example when the entire nation were tzaddikim and they behaved in such a manner, and we might start getting a different perspective about this whole thing of David and Bathsheba. Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi says, I have a same case of when the entire nation were tzaddikim. Lo asu Israel et ha'egel. It says, you know what? The entire Jewish nation gave rise to the golden calf. You know why? You know how this whole story makes sense? It doesn't. There's no way it could have happened. Imagine, right now we're in the counting of the Omer. In the 51st days that the Jewish people left Egypt, they completely refined themselves. Completely. To the extent they were able to see God. Imagine a person who's able to refine himself to such a state that each and every member of the nation was a prophet. And not such a prophet, prophecy that they saw on Mount Sinai, no prophet has ever achieved. Except Moses, yeah. But no other prophet since then have ever achieved what every regular person attained at Mount Sinai. That prophecy. So he says, it doesn't make sense. You want to tell me after the Jewish people attained such a high level and they heard from God himself, I am the Lord your God. Do not make any other God in front of you. 3,000 people from the Jewish nation. It's true, it's not the entire Jewish nation. 3,000 people from the Jewish nation made a golden calf, and the entire 2 million other people are looking at them and just letting them do it? Yeah, go ahead. So the story doesn't make sense. It says it's impossible. God did it this way. Why? Because God had an agenda. God wanted something to happen. It says God, just like God made Adam and Chava eat from the fruit of tree of knowledge, whether they liked it or not, they would have eaten it. Just like Yehuda was forced to go with Tamar, just like King David was forced to go with Bathsheba, yeah, this is also happening. God is forcing the issue. What's going on over here? Liten pitchon pele ba'alei tshuva. It is a statement to give people who want to do repentance. Shele'emar le'achar matan Torah, because it says after matan Torah, mi ייתן והיה לבבם זה להם ליראה אותי כל הימים. So it says, who will give that their hearts will be in such a position to fear for me all days? ואם היו במעלה גדולה זו, so if the Jewish people were in such a high level, what happened in 50 days? How is it possible that 50 days later they're doing this? כיצד הגיעו לעשות את העגל? How did they come to do the golden calf? אלא 40 days, not 50. אלא באו לידי חטא, but they come to sin. אלא כדי ללמד שאפשר לעשות תשובה. God wanted to teach the Jewish people. Such a high tzaddik as that nation, yeah, that nation, even though you're and you did such a terrible sin, idol worship, nothing most. You were such a high level, and you did such you were idol worshiper, don't worry, there's tshuva. So how much more so for people like us, who are not such high tzaddikim, to do tshuva? And the same lesson that the entire nation learns from the golden calf, every individual person learns from King David. In other words, it looks like God pushed King David to do that particular act, to teach the individual person. It is the golden calf is a thing to teach the entire nation how to do tshuva. King David's occurrence is to teach the individual that if a guy like King David can do such a thing, how much more can I do tshuva? על כל עבירה שבעולם, on every sin in the world, שאפילו עבירה חמורה זו של העגל, יש לה תיקון. That even such a big sin of the golden calf, there's a way to fix it. וזהו שאמר רבי יוחנן משום רבי שמעון בר יוחאי, and this is what רבי יוחנן say in the name of רבי שמעון בר יוחאי. לא דוד ראוי לאותו מעשה של בת שבע. You think King David is able to do such an act? He was a tzaddik. He cared about women, he cared about things, he cared about God, there was nothing else in his mind. ולא ישראל ראויים לאותו מעשה של עגל. And it says, you think the Jewish people actually did the golden calf? God forced the situation. God made it so. Just like the sin of the forbidden fruit. God forced the situation. לא דוד ראוי לאותו מעשה של בת שבע, because King David was not befitting to do that act, שנאמר, because it says, וליבי חלל בקרבי. About King David it says he had no evil inclination. שיצרו היה כאור בקרבו. He had zero evil inclination. He killed it. ולא היה סיבה שיוכל לשלוט בו עד כדי כך. It says he was completely able to control his evil inclination. ולא ישראל ראויים לאותו מעשה. And the Jewish people as a nation, that is not comprehensible that everybody stood while the golden calf is taking place over there. שנאמר באותה שעה, because God himself says on the Jewish people at that time, מי ייתן והיה ליבם זה להם ליראה אותי כל הימים. Who's going, I wish that in other words, they achieve the highest level of fear of God, of awe of God, that a human being could achieve. אלא למה עשו את מה שעשו? So what did they do, whatever they did? לומר לך, God is making them do it. In other words, there are times, we might have a whole class with some other time, where God takes free choice out of people. This is 3 places we discussed already, that God took away free choice of people. Usually you have free choice. In these cases, King David and the people of the golden calf, there was nothing that could have done. Golden calf would have been made anyway. King David and Bathsheba would have happened anyway. It's something that had to happen. לומר לך, because God wanted to teach, שאם חטא יחיד אומרים לו, that if an individual sinned, we tell him, לך אצל יחיד שחטא, go and learn by King David. A great person like King David. And remember, when King David was immediately, when it was pointed out to him that he is the man, what did he do? Don't come up with an excuse. That's what King David says. Chatati LaHashem. He says, I sinned to God. Admit, be a man. Take responsibility. Unlike some of the politicians that we know. Like, you know, there's one thing by Trump, he never says sorry. You know? David המלך, הוא למד שאפשר לעשות תשובה. Learn from him. King David wants to teach you about the aspect of tshuva to the individual. ואם חטאו ציבור, and if the congregation sin, אומרים להם, לכו אצל ציבור שחטאו. We tell them, go by the congregation that they sin. The case of the golden calf. וזהו שאמר רבי שמואל בר נחמני בשם רבי יונתן. And this is what it says in the name of Rabbi Yonatan. מהו שנאמר? What is it says? נאום דוד בן ישי. It says the saying of David, the son of Ishai. ונאום הגבר הקומל. And the ben raised on high. נאום דוד בן ישי שהקים עולה של תשובה. It says this is the statement of King David. You know what King David brought down into this world? The power of tshuva. To show you that a person can sin such a grave sin, so-called sin, yeah, we're going to put it like this, yeah, to show you that if he can do tshuva, how much more so we can do tshuva. We are not as high as him, yeah, so kal v'chomer, if he can rise to such levels as King David, how much more can we? שממנו למדים אפשר ומוטל על האדם לעשות תשובה. So this is the message of King David. So you ask, what did King David give the Jewish people? King David gave the Jewish people the power to do tshuva. In other words, the whole case with Bathsheba was so-called, think about it, forced on King David, whether he liked it or not. Even if he wouldn't have seen her that night, let's put it that way, God would have made sure it would have happened in some other manner to make sure that we learn that lesson today. Just like the sin of the golden calf, and just like the sin of the forbidden fruit. It's one of those three things. By the way, there's another thing, Yehuda and Tamar, it also says this is one of the places where God took it had to happen because Mashiach came out of it. In other words, Yehuda didn't have free choice in that aspect. It was taken away from him for that thing. I know it's a bit problematic, like I said from the beginning, and we don't have time to go through all the sources, but the overall pictures I think that we see. It's a very important aspect because it relates. One more aspect. Another time where we pushed God. Abraham and Sarah were married for 70, 80 years. Right? And Sarah didn't have a son. And again, like Chava, like Rivka, what does Sarah do? Sarah pushes God. She says to Abraham, what does she say to him? Take another wife, Hagar. And because of this, she pushed it. She could have just waited another 10 years. Everything would have been fine. We wouldn't have everything that is happening now in Israel wouldn't have happened. All she had to do is trust God. What do you have to push? Why do you have to push the whole thing? It's exactly the same thing. And what did Sarah do? She says, take Hagar. Hagar came. Ishmael was born. And by the way, you can see in the verses, it's terrible verses. By the way, before, when God makes the covenant with Abraham, he tells him the land of 10 nations. Right? And afterwards, after this whole case with Hagar, he only mentions 7. You know why? Because Ishmael wants 3 of them. Already right there comes the fight. Again, why? Because we push. But by the way, there's a whole different angle on this whole story. I didn't want to bring it into this thing. The whole angle is that the pushing is a good thing, not a bad thing. But we're not going to discuss it right now because it's a whole different class.